Hello again, YouTube. Um, I'm back with my second talk. I apologize it took so long. I've been working on this one for a little bit. I wanted to do as much study as I possibly could. It's by no means exhaustive, but I still wanted to present as much evidence as possible. And my second talk is going to be on God and does he need? I've heard this one a while, or at least for a while, anyways. I've been on a lot of forums and everything like that, and I've heard a lot of talk about this. This is one of the bigger questions. It's not as big as some of the other ones, but it's still something that requires some attention. You know, because you have, and it happens all the time. You see televangelists and people on TV will say, well, hey, if you give God this amount of money, then you'll be able to, whatever, you'll be able to get a new car, or you sow that seed money, and if you just give God your money, then this will happen and that'll happen and the other thing will happen for you. And so it kind of constitutes into, well, then if he's God, why would he need my money? Why in the world would I even have to give him money? Like, what would be his purpose for that? So I kind of wanted to address that. And I wanted to address the other things, like why would he even ask me to worship him? If he's such a great God, if the Christian God is so great, if he's, so big, and you Christians say he's this awesome God, well then, why would he need me to worship him? Why would he need me to follow him, or give him anything? I thought he was really great. Well, we're going to address those things. So I've entitled this talk, "Does God Need?" And obviously the answer is no, but I have to back up. Anytime that you're talking, and this is paramount for anything, you always want to define your terms. Words nowadays are loaded, like the term evolution. The term evolution, and we'll get to that later. That's going to be fun, because evolution, there's a big difference between the theory and the reality. But we'll get to that. But words are loaded nowadays. Words like tolerance, words like evolution. These words are loaded words. They can mean a plethora of different things. And you have to get someone to define their terms before you start speaking on these things. So if I'm going to talk about needs, or I'm going to say, well, no, God doesn't need, well, I've got to define my terms about what I'm really talking about. So let's talk about needs versus wants. Now, this might seem kind of trivial, kind of basic, but stick with me. It might surprise you what the difference is between needs and wants, because I'm going to get right down to the nitty-gritty. So we're going to go with my first premise, and I've split needs and wants into a few different categories. There are permanent needs, and then there are temporary needs. And then, of course, there are wants. Wants just kind of fall into a big general category. But there are permanent needs and there are temporary needs. Now, permanent needs, the way that I would define a permanent need, and I'll explain why once I define temporary needs. But a permanent need would be something that's necessary on a consistent and most times, keyword, daily basis, or death is guaranteed. That would be a permanent need. Something that is necessary on a consistent and most times daily basis. Now, not necessarily a daily basis, but more often than not, it is needed on a daily basis, or you're going to die. Your physical being will cease to exist. And the first one that I could think of, or at least the first one that I came up with, is water. Water is a pretty consistent need. Now, I was doing some research, and I actually figured out, besides Mahatma Gandhi, well, this is about food, so we'll get to food, because food is a little weird. Food's a little different. But as per water, they're saying on here, and this is from the Business Insider, that the longest that any human being can go with no water would be 3 to 4 days. A week would be generous, and that's because your body is made up of mostly water, 60 to 70%. And water does a lot, a whole lot for your body. I've been dehydrated before, and it's not fun. And I think I had acid reflux for a while, and gee whiz, I think I didn't drink any water for maybe 9 or 10 hours, and I was dehydrated. Like I could barely do anything. I could, and they took me to the hospital. I had to get an IV and all that sort of business. But that was only 9 hours. I can't imagine going a week with no water. That's a bit much. Now, we're talking about no water, no food. Your body needs water. And 3 to 4 days, no water, you're probably going to die. Now, they're taking this information from when they take people off of, like if someone's on life support, and they take them off of life support, they'll dehydrate before they starve to death. I know it sounds horrible, but that's what happens when they take someone off of life support. They'll dehydrate first, and they'll die from dehydration before they die from starving to death. So water is pretty consistent. You're going to need it pretty consistently, or you're going to die. Now, you will need physical intake of some kind, but it doesn't necessarily have to be food. And when I say it doesn't have to be food, I'm talking more in terms of supplements. You can take vitamins, things like that. Because you can go on a fast and just have water and physical supplements intake. They actually had, there is a study, and it was done in 1973. And a 27-year-old male, he actually fasted no food for 382 days. Now, this was underneath supervision. And he actually weighed quite a bit, before he started the fast. Started the fast. And he was taking vitamin supplements, he was taking potassium supplements, and he was taking yeast and vitamin supplements all throughout the process. But there was no food to speak of. It was simply vitamins and water. And he lasted for well over a year. So, but again, with just water, he needed physical intake of some proportion, and he needed it on a decently consistent basis. Not ridiculously consistent, but consistent enough to where death would have been guaranteed had he not had physical intake. Now, like I said, vitamins are fine. Oxygen. Oxygen's pretty obvious. You're going to need air in order to live. The longest person to ever hold their breath underwater was a German free diver. His name is Tom Saitis. I don't know if I'm saying that properly. I don't know German yet. Tom Saitis, and he held his breath underwater for 22 minutes and 22 seconds. This was in 2012. That's a long time. It actually says here that the average person can't even hold their breath for 30 seconds. I'm definitely there. I can barely hold my breath for 30 seconds. I probably couldn't. That's a long time. But 22 minutes and 22 seconds is pretty impressive. But still, you still need oxygen on a consistent basis, or that's it for you. You're going to pass away. And then you either need clothing or shelter. Now remember, these are underneath permanent needs. We're discussing needs versus wants. These are under permanent needs. Clothing or shelter. Now, this one's a little peculiar because even if you have water, some kind of physical intake, not necessarily food, and oxygen, if you're just running around naked everywhere, besides the social problems that you will have, you're going to have other issues like weather. Now, even if you're in Florida, it still rains in Florida. You have hurricanes in Florida. So you can't just be out there with no clothing on and your food and your water and your oxygen, but you're just kind of out there, and you don't have any clothing and you don't have any shelter. You're liable to get sick sooner than later, and you're liable to pass away from your sickness. We'll talk about antibodies later. That's underneath a different category, but you're liable to get sick if you don't either have clothing to protect you from the elements or shelter. Now, if you don't have clothing, you're going to need shelter, but your shelter has to be good enough to protect you from the elements. Otherwise, it's worthless. It's, you may as well not even have it. So you're going to need, on a consistent and most times daily basis, either clothing or shelter. Now, you don't need both. If your shelter is good enough, you don't necessarily need clothing. But if you don't have a shelter, you're going to need clothing. So as for permanent needs, these are things, again, that you're going to need on a consistent, and for most of these, a daily basis. Water, some kind of physical intake, oxygen, and either clothing or shelter. These are all permanent needs, things that you need consistently. And then I've split off into a category that I like to call temporary needs. Now, these type of needs are not necessarily needed on a daily basis, but they are still needed on a somewhat consistent basis for regular function to continue. Now, that's a whole bunch of wording and sentences. What I mean I'll explain it in the examples. It'll give you a better understanding of what I'm talking about. Food falls into this. The guy that I was talking about earlier that went without food for a year. It can be done. It can be done. You can go for long periods without food. It's called fasting. People do it all the time. All the time. You go for, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months with just water. No food. So food is not a permanent need. I can't put it there because people fast all the time. All the time. And they fast for long periods of time. So food is more of a temporary need. You need it. Yeah, it's true. But if you have intake of some kind, like vitamins that are not necessarily food, then you don't really need food. You can just take vitamins and supplements, and you can have water, and you'll be okay for quite some time. So, eventually you'll need food, and that's why I put it in the temporary needs, because eventually it will come to where you're going to need it, but it's not necessarily consistent. Not necessarily. Things like gas for your car. I just got gas for my car, a few days ago. And it was full, so I filled it up. My car does not need gas anymore. Now, it will need it when the gas runs out, which I don't know how many gallons, miles to the gallon that car gets. But eventually, I'll need gas again. Now, the car doesn't need gas right now, but again, eventually it will need it. So that's a temporary need. It's not permanent. It doesn't need it now, but it will. Then there are things that are a bit more peculiar, like projectile weapons for police officers. Guns are, I've heard, and you've probably heard it too, where people will say, people will say for and against guns. And I'm not going to try and get into the whole political thing right now. That's not my aim. I'll save that for another talk. But people will say, I'd rather have a gun and not need it than not have one and need it. Or no, I'm sorry. I'd rather have a gun and not use it than not have it and need it. And I always want to correct them and say, well, you don't need a gun. Now, being a police officer, if you've ever seen the movie The Expendables, okay, if you've ever seen that movie, Jason Statham, the actor in that movie, uses knives instead of guns. Now, he uses guns in that movie, and that movie's pretty gory. I wouldn't recommend watching it more than once. It's a pretty gory movie. Doesn't have any sex in it, which is good, but it's a pretty gory movie. He uses knives. And so he throws them. So you can train yourself, if you are a police officer, to do that, but you're still going to need, for your job, a projectile weapon of some sort. And it's for your job. It's so that you can continue to function regularly in your job. Now, when you get home, you can lock your gun away and never even use it again. You don't need it. You don't even have to take it out or, anything like that. So that's why I put it underneath a temporary need. Guns are not a permanent need. They're a temporary need. Now, they are a choice and they are a want as well. But for a police officer, they would be a temporary need. Or, especially for someone in the armed forces. Obviously, you're going to need your gun when you go over there. That's pretty clear. You're going to need a gun if you're going to fight in a war. Obviously. But you don't need that gun when you get back home. Now, again, you may want a gun, but it's not necessary for your continued existence. Now, we can get into, things like gangs and stuff like that, and yes, but again, that still falls under temporary needs. It's still a temporary need, because you can get out of that gang, or, if you do happen to get out of that gang, or you happen to get out of the military, or out of jail, or out of the bad situation, what have you, you won't need that gun anymore. So that's why I put it under temporary needs. And then things like antibiotics. I told you we'd get to that later. Again, if you're running around outside and you don't have any clothing, and you get sick, you're going to need antibiotics. You're going to need medicine. You're going to need something to make you well again if your body cannot fight off the infection. But when you're done fighting off the infection, you don't need them anymore. I don't need to take medicine right now. Why? Because I'm not sick. As a matter of fact, it would probably do more harm than good if I was to take antibiotics right now. I don't need them at this point. Now, when I become sick and and again, my body can't fight it off, then yes, I will need them. But until that time comes, I'm okay. They're not necessary to me. So those are more temporary needs. They're kind of in the middle. You need them at certain times, and you absolutely need them at certain times. But then there are times where you don't need them at all. They're not necessary to you. So that's why they're kind of in the middle. They're in this temporary position. And then we're going to go to wants. And wants are wants. They're luxuries. They're things that are not necessary for your physical life to continue, but they're nice to have. The computer that I'm speaking to you on, my couch in the background, television. Those things are wants. They're luxuries. Your car. Depending on where you are, that could be a permanent or a temporary need. Depending on where you are, a vehicle can be a temporary need. If you don't have like a busing system, or if you don't have a bike. Transportation. Let's bring it into a general category. That can definitely be a temporary need. Transportation. But wants are luxuries. They can be nice to have, but they can also be very harmful. And one of the luxuries that can be very, very harmful are things like drugs, addictions. I was doing some research. My wife, she's gone through this. This was before we met, but my wife went through some really hard times with drugs and with alcohol. Very, very tough times with them. And like I said, this was before me and her got married. She went through it. She went through it. She went through it for a good long while, and she quit cold turkey, all that stuff. She just one day she was like, you know what, this isn't me. This isn't me. And she was praying about it. She was talking to God about it and things like that. But she quit cold turkey. I was actually looking up the statistics and looking up quitting because cocaine is about the hardest drug. There are probably harder drugs out there now, but as per a reference point, I wanted to use cocaine. And if you were to quit cold turkey, you wouldn't die. You wouldn't die. You would feel like you're going to die. And they actually have the withdrawal symptoms here. Of course, restless behavior, depressed, fatigue, increased appetite, unpleasant dreams, slowing of activities. Basically, you're going to be hurting. You're going to be hurting. You're going to be hurting, and you're going to go through some wicked withdrawals. But from what I've read, it's not the quitting that kills. It's the relapse that kills. It's not the quitting that kills. If you quit cold turkey and you stay off, it's still a want. These drugs are still a want. You want them back into your system, but you don't need them. You don't need them. You don't need them. You're going to feel like you need them. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's going to feel like a need. But in reality, it's not. It's not. And it's not the quitting cold turkey that kills. It's the relapse that kills. And also, it's the feelings while you're quitting cold turkey, because you may feel like you want to die, so you may unfortunately want to commit suicide, and many people have done it. But again, that's a choice. That's not something that's forced, and that's not something that you needed to do. You wanted to because you didn't want to deal with the pain. Now, like I said, this is nothing easy, and I'm not trying to make light of this. What I am saying is that it still falls under the category of a want. It's a very strong want. Very strong want. It's the same thing with sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is not a need. Don't feed me that baloney. It's not a need. It's a want. It's a very strong want. It's a desire. It's very deep-rooted into us. But it is not a need. It is not necessarily for your physical life to be sustained. It's not. No one. Ever. Ever. Like I said, it's a want. It's a luxury. Now, it's something that we've been given that we can do, but it is a want. It is not a need. It is not necessary. So, those are the categories, and that's kind of the way I wanted to break it down. Permanent needs, temporary needs, and wants. So, when we're talking about God, does he need? We're talking about permanent needs and temporary needs. And God has neither of them. He does not need anything in the permanent category. He does not need anything in the temporary category. He is completely self-sufficient and self-reliant. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be God. He would just be some big, powerful thing up there. But eventually, you could get better than him. I could get better than him. He wouldn't be God. You can't call a being God if he has some kind of little chink in his armor. If there's some little thing that you can get over on him, well, he's not God anymore then. He's not. I think on Iron Man 2, gosh, his name escapes me, but he was the main villain for Iron Man. Mickey Rourke was the actor, and he said if you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe in him. If you can make God bleed, then people cease to believe in him. It makes sense. If you can find a tiny chink in that armor, something small, he's not God anymore. He's not infinite anymore. No, he's a big, powerful being, but eventually I can get there. No, that's not the God we're talking about when we talk about the Christian God. Okay? It's not the God we're talking about. There is no chink in his armor. He has no limitations. He suffers no lack. He experiences no deficiency. He is the uncaused first cause. That's what we talk about all the time. But let's continue. Now, these premises, or well, this first premise anyways that I'm talking about, this premise with the permanent needs, the temporary needs, and the wants, this only explains permanent needs and temporary needs without supernatural help, i.e. God. So with no supernatural help, these are your permanent needs, these are your temporary needs, and these are your wants. If we're talking about when you bring God into the picture, all these needs and wants go away, because all you need is God. All this stuff goes away. This has been proven during when Moses went up on Mount Sinai. Now, I know if you're an atheist, you probably don't want to hear about this stuff, but this proves my point, so just stay with me. When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights. That's when he was getting the 10 Commandments. And he was completely sustained by God. Now, just dismiss all of the doubts and everything from your mind, and just imagine that if that is true, then he's up there 40 days and 40 nights, and he doesn't need anything. The only thing he needed was God, because just being in God's presence emitted life. So he was simply sustained up there for 40 days and 40 nights. No food, no water, no nothing. He didn't need anything. It was the same way in the Exodus with the children of Israel when they're walking across the desert. God sustained them. Sustained them for 40 years, as a matter of fact. But, again, you have to do research, figuring out if what I'm saying is true. Don't take my word for it. Read the Bible and do your research. I'm speaking on them because I know they're true, because I've read my Bible and I've done the research. That's something that you have to do. And it's the same thing with Jesus when he was in the wilderness. Pardon me. When he was tempted by the devil. Same way. 40 days and 40 nights. He was sustained by God. So, when we're talking about these premises, or this premise rather, permanent needs, temporary needs, and wants, when we're talking about these things from the perspective of no supernatural help, these are the things that you're going to need, with no supernatural help. But if you're talking about with supernatural help, then these things change. They go away. Because now all you need is God. And none of this other stuff really matters. So I kind of wanted to throw that in there, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be as exhaustive as possible within the time that I have. So I think a better question comes up. If God doesn't have any needs, okay, let's just say, in the realm of possibilities, I'm telling you the truth, okay, and God doesn't have any needs. This Christian God that we're talking about, the God of the Bible, doesn't have any needs, okay. Then let's get back to the beginning of what we talked about before. Then why in the Bible are you asking for money? Why are you asking for better choices to be made? Why ask for anyone to follow him? Why ask for worship? What's the real purpose of asking for any of these things if they're not needed? If I'm going to ask you for something like money or worship or for you to make a better choice, don't I get something from that? Doesn't that make sense? And then I suppose the natural question follows that if I'm to tell you that, if I'm to tell you some reason why he asks for these things, why in the world did God make us? What's the real purpose? Why even put us here? If all this jazz about intelligent life is true, okay, and we're not just here just to work and eat so that we can work and eat so that we can work and eat so that we can work and eat. If we're not just here to do that, to just kind of be in this big circular practical joke, then why are we here? Why would God make us? What's the real purpose? Well, if God does exist, all right, if he's really up there, then for all intents and purposes, he would know how we should live. It only makes sense. If he's as powerful as Christians are claiming him to be, if he's as powerful as the Bible says he is, then he would know every single detail and logistical facet about our lives. Everything. Everything. Any kind of eccentricity that we would have. Any kind of ideology, any small amount of whatever. Anything, whatever, he would know. He would know. And he would know far better than we would. Anything. So he would know exactly how we should live, the best way for us to live, the best way possible, the most that we're going to get out of life, and the best way to help us through this life. I mean, if he's God, why would you expect him to do anything less than any of that? And how could you expect him to do anything less? No. Are you kidding? As Christians, we're talking about he's perfect. So you had better expect that. I'm not talking about expect it in a manner of not overconfidence, or like you're telling him he had better do something. Arrogance, that's the word. I'm not talking about arrogance, but an expectation of, well, God is who he says he is, so he should be able to lead me through this life. And also you have to understand that, and this is, I think this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. God doesn't just say arbitrary things. I heard a good saying, and it said, "Has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurs to God?" He doesn't. When God states things, or says something, or does something, he doesn't go back over that something and say, "Oh man, rats, I should have done something better," or "Oh wow, I'm glad that worked out. That was a good idea. I'll do that again next time." Every single thing that he does, everything that he says, whether he says no or yes or maybe or wait, it is done with a purpose. It's done with a plan. All the time, every time. It's never arbitrary. Never. Not once. Not once is it arbitrary. It's always done with a purpose or a plan of some kind. And it's always done with us in mind. God says he says in his word, and I'm going to give you some scripture. Like I said, stick with me. He says, "I know the thoughts that I think towards you. Thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." He's not thinking evil towards us. He's not thinking how he can smack us down the next time we do something wrong, or how he can, discipline us the next time we mess up. No, that is not stuff that's on God's mind. Not at all. Not at all. He's always thinking about how he can build us, how he can better us. That's the same thing that I think for my son. You think I'm thinking about when my son does something wrong? Don't you dare do anything wrong, boy, or I'm gonna, it's gonna be time. No, I want him to be better. I want him to be better. I every single time, yes, I discipline him, of course. I'm going to have to discipline him. But I discipline him to make him better, so that he can reach a new level, so he can be better than he is, so he can be a better man than I was. That's what I'm trying to do for him. That's the same. God is the Father. If I'm a dad, God is super dad. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make us better. He's trying to conform us to Jesus Christ. That's what he's trying to do. So, yeah, there's pain involved, but he's always going for the benefit. He's always going for the greater. And also the reason that he asks for these things is because we benefit from it, okay? Let's take money, for example, all right? Why in the world would I give my money away to a God who doesn't need it? Because it benefits me in return. What it does is it shows that okay, let me put this into a vividly accessible example for you. If I'm to jump out of a plane, and I'm going to tell you that I trust that the parachute is going to work, am I just saying that, or am I actually going to put the parachute on me and jump out of the plane? See, if I trust the parachute but I just say that, and I don't use the parachute, well then what good is it? It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. But if I actually put the parachute on and I jump out of the plane, oh, okay, now you really trust the parachute because you're willing to take the chance with it. This is the same thing with God. Why would I give my money to a being who doesn't need it, or maybe he doesn't even exist? Why in the world am I giving my money away? What you're doing is you're putting in a step of faith. Now, this faith can be based on prior examples or not, or prior examples about how God has come through for you, or not. You can just be taking a step of faith. But it's a step of faith. It's saying, you know what? Even if there's a minuscule chance that you're up there, I want to try it out. Even if there's a tiny little dot of a chance that you're up there, I'm going to give it a try. And like I said, that's up to you. That's your choice. I talked about free will in my last chat. It's your choice. You do what you want to do. I'm just telling you from what I know And from what I've experienced, he's up there. And if you make the choice and make a step towards him, he will make a step towards you. And you'll see. But again, it's something you have to experience by yourself. I can't give you that experience. That's a choice you have to make. I can't make it for you. And it's the same thing with things like for us making better choices. You know that, and I'm going to give you another scripture here, but again, just stay with me. Don't glaze over. Jesus said the 2 commandments. There are the 10 commandments, but he narrowed it all the way down to 2. And it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and also love your neighbor as yourself. See, now, everybody, they hear the first one, but loving your neighbor as yourself, could you imagine if everyone in the world loved their next door neighbor as themselves? Just their next door neighbor, just the guy to the left of them. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how this world would be if we all loved our neighbors as ourselves? That means you took care of the guy next to you like you take care of your own self. My goodness. Can you imagine how the world would be? This world would be exceptional. Exceptional. It's right there in the Bible. It's right there. Love your neighbor as yourself. Doesn't matter what your neighbor did. Guess what? Love him like you would love yourself. Now, obviously, if you have difficulty loving yourself, well, then you have difficulty and there needs to be other steps taken for that. But, my goodness. I mean, you don't think that we would benefit from that? This is what God says. You don't think we're going to benefit from loving our neighbors as we love ourselves? I can guarantee you will benefit from it. I can guarantee everybody in the world would benefit from that. Everybody. Everybody. God says things to help us out, not to help him. Us loving each other as we love ourselves is not going to help God out. It's not going to do anything for him. He's not going to gain anything from it. No, we're going to gain something from it. And then the question that I think naturally comes up is, well, then why would God even make us? Well, as we've been talking about, and I think it's kind of implied in the second point that I made, he loves us. He wants us to spend an eternity with him. That's what he wants. He wants us to be up there with him. He has a desire to share love with us. That's why Jesus Christ came down to earth and died on the cross. And now, like I said, you can believe that, you cannot believe that. You've got to do your own research to find out whether that's true or not. I've done the research, and I've done the research from both sides. And I can tell you right now that both secular and not Christian sources, I mean, obviously the Bible, but secular sources and Christian sources both agree. They don't agree that Jesus Christ was God, but the secular sources aren't worried about that. They're just simply historic sources. They agree that Jesus Christ lived, and he was crucified on a Roman cross. And that's from secular sources. That's from people that are not Christians. Historians that are writing things as they happen. Like I said, go and do the research on those things. The research is on YouTube. You can look up extra biblical sources for the existence of Jesus Christ. Well, you're on YouTube right now, so type that in there after you're done with this video. Extra biblical sources for the existence of Jesus Christ, and you'll find it. And match that versus whatever skeptics say, and you'll find out what the truth is. There's a really good saying, and it's I think it kind of drives the point home. All right, let's say I confessed my love to my current wife, okay? But let's say she wasn't my wife, all right? I was courting her, we're going through the courtship thing, and I'm like, I'm telling my buddies, like, man, I love her. I love her, man. You know what? I'm gonna go propose to her. I'm gonna go tell her I love her. And so let's say, I'm getting ready, and I'm going over there, and I go, and I get on one knee, and I'm like, I love you. Will you marry me? And she's like, oh, there's this other guy. Oh, my heart. If I love her or I try to show my love to her and she doesn't love me back, I'm hurting right now. And I'm hurting because I've lost something. I've lost something. I just put myself out there and she's like, declined. I just lost something. That hurts. That hurts. Rejection hurts. Anyone who's ever been rejected can tell you that, which is everybody in the world. Rejection hurts. God is different. If God says, I love you and I want the best for you, so follow me and I will give you the best, and you say, nah, I'm good, I don't believe you exist, blah, 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 whatever kind of reasoning you can come up with, I don't believe you exist because of this, that, and the other, or you do exist but I don't really care, or you're just one of many, so I'm going to go over here and check out these other guys and see. God hurts as well. But he doesn't hurt because he's lost something. He hurts because you've lost something. I've said it on the video previous to this one, on my free will video, and I'll say it again. It would behoove you that if you're an atheist, if you're a skeptic, skepticism is good, that's fine, that's okay, you're supposed to be, that's alright. It would behoove you not to be aloof to these kinds of things. At the very least, you have to give serious thought to, there could be a God. Because if there is, okay? If the Christian God exists, alright? Let's suspend all arguments, okay? Let's say for sure the Christian God exists. When you die, because you're gonna die, and when I die, because I'm gonna die eventually, you will lose everything. Everything. Because that's what the Bible says. Everything. Everything. Anything that you think you gained, your money, your possessions, you can't take that stuff with you anyways, but you're going to lose everything. And you're going to spend an eternity in torment. Not because God sent you there, because you chose to go there. Because God said, hey, I'm here, and you said, God's not there. Just because you say, God's not there, and you come up with a bunch of reasons, doesn't mean God's not there. I'm sorry. It's just not the way it works. But let's say you are right, okay? Let's say, as a skeptic, as an atheist, you're completely right. God doesn't exist at all. He doesn't exist. When you die, so what? No one cares. You don't get any bragging rights. You don't gain anything from it. I don't know, because I haven't died yet, and once I get there, I won't care either. So you die, you don't care. I don't know, and once I die, I won't care. And the next person doesn't know. And once they die, they won't care. And the next person doesn't know. Nobody gains anything from it. As an atheist, if you're going to say that, you just die and there's nothing, well then, life is nothing. Life is pointless. You know how many people don't get justice in this life? How many people get away with stuff in this life? That means there's no ultimate. There's nothing else after this. It's just nothingness. So, do everything you can. Pleasure had better be maximized, and pain had better be minimized. Money had better be maximized, because that's the top you can get. That's it. Money and pleasure. That's it. That's the highest you can go. There's nothing else over that. I'm telling you right now, it would behoove you to look into higher things. Because, and I always use the terminology, now whether you believe Michael Jackson committed suicide or not, I don't know. Same thing with Robin Williams. But I will tell you that there have been many, many wealthy people that have committed suicide, because guess what? They maximized their money and their pleasure, and they still weren't happy. There was still something missing. They had all the money and all the pleasure. Gee whiz. They could buy and sell people. Anything they want. Get it. It's nothing. I got it. I got the money for it. but there was still that hole there. So, anyways, I appreciate you listening to me ramble on. Yoroshiku. Arigato ne.